Hey there, we are the Pagan Podcast. I'm Susanna.
And I'm Tyler. Our goal is to talk about being pagan in the modern era and to help others on their journey.
In Season 1, our main focus is Northern European religions, including but not limited to Norse paganism, Proto-Indo-European religion, Druidism, Wicca, and more.
This podcast is brought to you by our willingness to appease our boredom by sharing, educating, and learning with our listeners.
We are the Pagan Pie Podcast, and I'm Susanna.
And I'm Tyler. Our goal is to talk about being pagan in the modern era and to help others on their journey.
You're listening to Season 1, Episode 2, Storytime. Today we're going to give a summary of a Swedish folk tale called Troll Ride.
Our story begins, and the focus of our story is the farmer's son, Lars, who, just as a summary here, is hoping to win the love of his life, Lisa's hand in marriage. The key focus and characteristic of Lars in this story is that he, for lack of a better term, is always fashionably late.
So you didn't find that in the version that you read that she was royalty?
No, it doesn't mention any of that. Just that her father is waiting to see if he arrives on time. Basically, this one task is the make or break whether or not he gets his blessing,
Right.
and therefore they actually can get married. So,
which I thought was really interesting that that's the only thing, because
right.
What does that say about the whole kingdom? Are they all fashionably late? Or what?
Well, I was thinking maybe it was a commonplace thing where they picked your worst character flaw
and if you
make
can
you
overcome
fight
it, then you're worthy.
Right? Like, all right, you have to overcome your worst part of yourself to be worthy, type thing. I don't know, just a thought, but
yeah, maybe. Well, so in the version that I read, I don't know if it was that she was royalty or that she was of noble birth, which that doesn't necessarily mean you're royal. You could be just a higher class person.
Right.
So in a nutshell, she's way out of his league, and he's a farmer, or is a farmer's son.
Yeah.
Has to show up on time. Does he do it?
Okay, so our story of the farmer's son, Lars, he is on his way to town to buy a fancy coat because he wants to look his best when he shows up at his love's door and asks for her hand from her father.
I mean, you gotta look good.
Right. And on his way to the city, he decides to take a shortcut just to shave some time off because everybody knows he is always late and he has to make it to her house by 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So he goes through the forest and there's this lady troll in the ditch who's like, help me, I have broken my foot.
And she's described as having dark peppercorn eyes nearly hidden behind black matted hair, a carrot-looking nose, and dark bread crust-looking lips. So
ugly.
Just like all the worst parts of food that kids don't want to eat, which is probably why kids stay away from trolls.
And then, so basically she says, hey, I know you're just doing stuff, but I need help. I need you to go get me sap from the 7 different pine trees that's over there in the forest, because you're going through the forest anyways. Might as well help me out. I got money to give you. And he was like, ew, no, you're a troll. I hate you.
And instantly realized or thought back to all these stories that he'd heard about dealing with trolls and how bad it was for you and that they brought nothing but trouble. And the troll pleaded with him and held up a gold coin, saying that she'd already given out 5 of these gold coins to other travelers, expecting that they would come help, but none of them have returned. So she assumed that they just took the money and ran.
Yeah. So yeah, and as Tyler described, she was pretty dang ugly. And she kept talking about how her mom was looking for her, and he's all like, well, why don't you give her a sign? Bye, girl. And he left and whatever. And then he accidentally finds these 7 pine trees, and he's like, oh man, I can't get that song her mother's singing, like looking for her daughter, like out of my head. So basically he like is guilted. He has that guilty conscience.
I think it's kind of a guilty conscience thing, but it's also he keeps hearing this song inside of his head. So I think he's a little bit like, oh, I should have helped, but then I think it's an overwhelming sense of there's something in my head that won't go away until this task is done.
He's
And
being haunted.
Yeah, he's kind of haunted by it, right? While he's occupied, while he's looking for this perfect jacket to buy on the way to Lisa's house, right? So Lars gets this, he goes to town after he met the witch in the woods. He goes to town and he's keeping his eyes open for these pine trees and thinking, you know, he sees them at one point and goes, I just don't have the time. I have to be there at 6. So he goes to town, he buys this fancy jacket and he's all done up and everything like that. Got his hair did. And on his way back through the forest to get back to Lisa's house, he decides, after hearing this song in his head all day of this troll's mom like calling out for her, and he just can't get out of his head, he's like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna do this. So he goes and he collects this resin or this sap from the 7 trees.
Yeah. And so he gets that, he ends up and he goes and takes it to her and basically throws it at her so that she can
very unceremoniously.
Yeah. So she can make this salve or whatever to put on her wounds to heal herself.
He doesn't even stick around though. That's the thing. He just kind of shows up and he's like, here, I hope I never see you again. And then he takes off and he's racing on his horse through the woods, trying to get to Lisa's house. And he's noticing it's getting dark and he's, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of time. Mm-hmm. And as he rides past one of his friend's house, his friend is telling him, hey, you're not going to make it. And he's, I have to try. And he keeps going.
You'll never make it. Never make it.
As the friend zooms past, you know, he zooms past his friend. So he's slowly being lost in the distance there. And then he peeks over his shoulder.
And he sees this dark figure, right?
Yeah, he sees this dark, like gray figure on the back of his horse out of the corner of his eye. So he's like, I have to be hallucinating. And he turns back, but every time he glances back, he's more and more sure that there's somebody else on the horse with him that's actually guiding and holding the reins.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I like the way it was written because it was kind of like, oh shoot, what's happening? Right? Is everything gonna be okay? Is he gonna make it?
Shouldn't have thrown those the pine sap at the troll. Should have just handed it to her.
Yeah, he could have been a little nicer.
Yeah, a little bit. But he's galloping through the woods and his horse is moving just a little bit faster. He's pushing this horse and he flies past his dad's house. His dad's like, you're not going to make it, but he doesn't hardly have the time to say the words. The horse is moving that much faster.
Yeah, and by now his jacket is all torn up, cut.
From hitting all the branches and everything. His face is cut up. The jacket is dusty and torn.
It's exactly how I want my future husband to look when he comes to my house to propose to me. You know, ripped up.
Look like he's getting ready to pose for the cover of a metal band.
Yeah, there you go. So for all those listeners out there. Anyway.
But he's racing through. His friend says he's not going to make it, and he zooms past. His dad says, oh, you're not going to make it. And he's flying. And at this point, like, he knows that there's something behind him holding the reins of this horse. And the horse's hooves aren't even hardly touching the ground. The thing's basically flying through the woods. Right. So, like, each of these branches is hitting and ripping his coat and cutting his face. But he doesn't care. He's getting covered and drenched in sweat and rain and all this. And then fast forward to Lisa's house. And her dad's sitting there going, he's not going to make it. We would have heard him coming across the wooden bridge, the galloping of horse feet. And she's like, well, I'm going to wait till 6. And he's like, well, he's got 1 minute to go. And they keep waiting. And then there's 30 seconds. The dad's like, you have to give it up. And then they hear the trotting of horse hooves across just this ridiculous speed across the bridge.
Like, zoom. Hey, girl,
When
let's get married.
when the clock starts to chime 6, it has 6 chimes, and just at that 6th chime, just before that happens, Lars opens the door to the house, and the father is just awestruck. Jaw drops to the floor. Here's Lars standing there, hair's a mess from all the wind, his jacket's shredded, his face is cut up.
And basically, Daddy was like, yo, you got here on time looking like that? You must have seen hell. Yeah, take her.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And then from that day forward, he made it on time, but he had this figure that was going with him, and he knew that. But it didn't matter for the rest of his life whether he rode on a horse or he drove a carriage. So he always made it on time after that. So was a really interesting tale. And I know you had some really good notes on this with regard to like the troll and everything like that.
Yeah. First things first. All I'm going to say is if you're going to go propose to someone, you probably should have had your new jacket a day before or a week before. That's your fault that you're all late all the time. So
Right.
maybe you needed a troll because you're so damn irresponsible, Lars. So that's part of what I have to say. The other thing is, like, why did he have to be so rude to the troll? I get that they're kind of racist back then. They're like, I don't know who this troll is. Trolls like to eat people. Trolls are this and that, you know? But this troll in particular, she was a sweetheart. I don't care how ugly she was so sweet. She was like, you know what? He's late all the time, and he was the one person that came back to help me. And she was
Right.
so grateful that she stuck by his side for the rest of his life to help him, because like trolls can have magical powers, to help him speed up and get there on time, almost like she became his little spirit guide or whatever. I think, you know what? Props to you, troll. Yeah, other than that, even though it did make him late, I think he really just helped her because he had a guilty conscience and he was haunted, just like you were saying earlier. I don't think he really cared at that moment. I think it took her helping him for him to realize how pure her intentions were and how she
Right.
could be a good friend to him or ally. I had a little note on trolls. So earlier I mentioned that in Old Norse folklore, trolls are defined as giant evil monsters that are ugly. After the introduction of Christianity, however you want to say it, the term troll became a definition for anyone who practices magic or is not of the Christian faith. So a witch, a troll, they're basically the same thing. In this Scandinavian story, a troll is considered a breed of Jotnar, like from Jotunheim, like what Loki.
Land of the Giants.
Yeah, Land of the Giants, and where Loki's from, or descendant of. The Jotnar, they're a breed of Jotnar that can turn to stone with sunlight, but that's not always a requirement, and that depends on the tale, because Norwegian trolls are different than Scandinavian trolls, and all of that is just different perspectives, and so on with the different countries. So yeah, depending on the tale, they can be really ugly or they can look like humans, and they have a strong connection to the earth, which grants them their other random skills. So that's where we get his horse or his carriage always was going so fast, because she had that magical power. And I think that's a really interesting character for a culture to have, because the trolls are like stone people, you know?
Right.
Much like the trolls in the movie Frozen.
Right.
It
Yeah.
sounds like a silly way to compare, but honestly, they did a good job at showcasing that culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so trolls aren't particularly in favor of human beings. However, our troll, our lady troll, she rewarded Lars because she knew he went out of his way to help her, and it almost made him late. And even though it was for his own sanity, she knew she could reward him in a way that they can have like a copacetic relationship. It didn't say anything about their relationship, but I feel like she wanted to get out of that ditch and probably was like, I want to see the world outside the forest. So,
Right. And there was something that you brought up before, the don't judge a book by its cover analogy, right? But I think that doesn't necessarily apply just to trolls in this instance, because if you remember back to the start of the story, when the troll's laying there in the ditch and she's asking for help, she said there were 5 other people that took her money. She gave them a gold coin each. They just
yeah.
took it and they're like, peace. And they ditched, haha, see what I did there? They ditched her. And they just left and they took her money. In one instance, people are told to hate the trolls and everything like that. But in another instance, if you look at it from a different angle, the trolls have every reason to hate the humans for doing stuff like that. So
absolutely, because like, I mean, and that's the thing, hate spreads more hate. The only way to get over that is to spread love. And maybe that's another theme, because she was like, I'm gonna go out of my way to help him even though he was rude to me.
Right.
Because like, that's the thing, when you take 2 warring tribes, you're not going to heal or be friends or whatever if they're both still just hating and hating and hating each other. So she showed compassion to him. The last thing I had was that her gift was worth way more than the gold that she lost and the gold that she gave him. For. Like, he came out on top, and he was also a jerk who didn't deserve it, in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe this troll just has a bigger heart than I do. I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, and then at the end of this story, they talk about how he felt her presence through the rest of his days whenever he's on trips, and it kind of reminded me of that concept of having a guardian spirit or a spirit guide, or like some sort of other creature that watches you that might not be in the same realm.
Yeah. And that'll be a topic for another episode entirely.
Yeah. Well, I can put a link in the show notes, or you can pick up any book on Swedish folklore. It's a pretty popular one. But yeah, I mean, it's a really cool story if you're interested. Do you have any thoughts on it that we didn't mention, Tyler?
No, I don't think so. I would encourage everybody to read it for themselves. We did this episode a little bit differently with picking a story and kind of diving into that head first, as opposed to doing a whole bunch of research on several different topics and bringing those together for everybody. And I really enjoyed this story time episode.
I do too. Honestly, it's a little less effort than all the other stuff. Not that I don't want to put effort into it. Just that in order to cover all the topics we cover in a podcast, it's nice to have an in-between podcast. It's a little bit more relaxing and chill.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, that being said, though, if you have any story recommendations that you want to hear our thoughts on, because there's a lot of really weird ones, like about how the Norse god Loki he's a transgender and a mother and a father. Like, that's a fun story in itself. I'm not saying we'll do that next time, but like, if you have any suggestions, send us an email or Facebook message or Instagram, where you can just ask us questions for our FAQ part.
Side note, but there was a game you and I talked about like a few years ago. It's free on Xbox, but it's called Smite, Battleground of the Gods. And all of the characters have jokes, and the jokes are directly related to the myths where they come from. Speaking of Loki, there's one where he's just standing there and he goes, "Man, you think you have it bad as a parent? My kids are monsters." And then he laughs, ha ha ha. He goes, "Seriously." I died. I was like, I'm done. I can't. It was fantastic. It's great. So, but definitely.
My kids are monsters.
And he just lets out this malicious laughter for about 3 seconds. Then he goes, "No, seriously." And that's kind of it. And I was just like, I can't anymore. I don't remember winning that match, but the first time I heard that, because I was just dying too hard.
All right, that's our show. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on our Facebook page at the Pagan Invasion for Education, or on Instagram at Pagan Pie Podcasts. Send any questions, comments, or story suggestions to our email at paganpiepodcast@gmail.com.
Tune in next time to talk about the first 4 Elder Futhark runes, a creation story, and the solstice.
Bye.
Peace out.